This episode is proudly supported by Crunch. Running a hospitality business isn't for the faint-hearted. Between ordering stock, scheduling rosters, paying bills, motivating your team, and keeping customers happy, there's a lot on your plate. It's no surprise that business planning often gets put on the back burner. Well, here's something that can help. Introducing Crunch, a new app to help simplify the business side of hospo. With Crunch, you get access to practical, bite-sized education, proven strategies, and a supportive community of hospo owners just like you. When it comes to the Crunch, if you're looking for proven ways to build a successful, sustainable business, Crunch has you covered. Try Crunch now. To get 14 days free, just head to crunchhospo.com.au.
To get the best out of our staff, they've got to see the result. They've got to know what the result is. They've got to know the satisfaction of the guests. It's an open kitchen. All the guests walk past the kitchen on the way out. And so they see that satisfaction from the guests, and the guests engage with the staff in the kitchen. And I think that, as much as anything nowadays, is a driving force for them.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Pushing the boundaries with multiple venues, all doing very different things, is no easy feat. But how do you do it and ensure all are highly successful, unique offerings? Dan Arnold is a chef and owner of RDA, Locke and Pneuma, all in Queensland. Dan, how are you?
Good, thanks, Huck. Thanks for having me on.
It's awesome to get you on the show. You're part of the whole new wave that's pretty amazing up there in Queensland over the last decade. How are things at the moment?
Look, it's an exciting place to be. It's an exciting place to live outside of this industry, and I think in this industry it's even more exciting. We've just had a huge casino open up here. We've got an influx of people coming into the state for independent restaurants and restaurants in the casino. So yeah, it's pretty awesome.
You've been a big part of the evolution of the culinary scene. How have you seen it change over the last decade?
Well, I'll go a little bit back before that. I left Australia in 2010. I left Brisbane, and I came back in 2018, and it was unrecognisable. It had already come leaps and bounds in that time, and then already starting at 2018, I was pretty impressed by how my little country town had grown up and made it to the big scene. And next thing you know, we've got Brisbane as it is today, winning restaurants, winning awards left, right and centre, being recognised internationally. So it's pretty exciting.
I want to dive into all three of your venues just a little bit now and a bit further on. You've got three very different venues doing different things. Tell us a little bit about them.
Okay, so RDA is I suppose we call the flagship. It's the one that I opened up first, and it was never the intention to open other restaurants after that. I came back to Australia and wanted to have a crack myself, as many young chefs do, and I got the opportunity to get going in halfway through 2018, and now we're into our 7th year. So there's been a lot of I told you so moments to people who said we'd never survive, who said it would never work. Normally on the 10th of July every year, that's when we have our little smoke to ourselves. But yeah, it's RDA it's where I'm pretty much every day, whether we're open or not. It's a home to me. It's a restaurant I've seen evolve over time, while Brisbane's been evolving even quicker. So yeah, it's pretty cool to say that we're still kicking goals 7 years in.
Tell us about the different offerings that you have, because the restaurants are quite different to each other.
Yep. So I suppose there's probably our gastronomic restaurant. Le Cachevin, it's we call it a bouchon lyonnaise. So it's like an underground wine restaurant. It's wine focused. We're importing all our own wines from France. Heavy focus on Burgundy. And the food is not a secondary offering, but it's definitely on the same level pegging as the wine. There's no hero one or the other there. And it's got this really cool underground wine room sort of vibe to it. And people just come in there and they just like to disappear from the real world, I suppose. And then from there, we got the opportunity to open a restaurant last year in the CBD, and that one's in partnership with a very, very good friend of mine, a great chef, Matt Blackwell. So once again, another style of food. And I think just to hone in that point of you said different restaurants, different offerings, I think for me is that they've all got the same train of thought. They're all aligned. They're all parallel to each other. The attention to detail, things like that, even if they are still, you know, satisfying different areas of the market.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that foundation is similar for all of them, and yet the experience, I guess, for a diner, culinary speaking, is quite different. How do you create that foundation to allow all venues to sort of be themselves?
I think it comes from the people running them. So myself, my managers, my business partners, whoever it is that's in their day and day, it's the personality we bring to these venues. And the personality we bring to it, it's what brings the attention to detail, what brings the focus of being, for example, Rahman up at Locke, wine focused. He's a sommelier from a chef's background. Matt over at Pneuma, it's a food focused restaurant, same as RDA. So it's people who aligns with me in the way we work, the way we think. That's what gives each venue its train of thought, and it's yeah, I suppose it's steps to success, as they say.
Well, I want to go in detail in a little while with each venue because they are quite amazing in their own right. But take us back to when you were young. Whereabouts did you grow up, and what sort of role did food play?
I grew up in Brisbane, Brisbane boy through and through. Never moved away until I was 23. Didn't see snow until I was 23 as well. I'm one of those real sheltered in a way sort of Brisbaneites. And so food for me, it was, I think as many Australian families who were not culturally influenced by other countries, food was not as much of an importance. It was more, it was a necessity. It was, you know, we had to eat, things like that. The long lunches, the long family meals were not so much of a thing as they were in other cultures. And so, you know, mum always cooked everything herself. There was never going out to restaurants. There was never, fish and chips was the only takeaway we had once a week on Friday nights, and that was it. It was basic cooking, but it was good. It, you know, it did its job, and that's about where it ended for food at an early age. You know, the old overcooked green beans, nice khaki colour. That's you know, you can almost like fury them up between your teeth. That's the way that's the way we like them, and Mum loves it because every time I have a chat about her cooking and growing up, it's always the thing I say, and she always looks at me and tries to do it better when I go over for dinner, and they're always just cooked to buggery.
I think it's pretty common for many families in Australia of food back then. When did you first start getting interested in food and think of it as a career?
So I had a part-time job during high school, the latter years of high school at Sizzler. I started at Sizzler as a washing dishes, and then I evolved. I went through to the salad bar. I was a salad bar attendant doing the old cheesy garlic toast.
Yeah, the classic salad bar.
Yep, and then I eventually got moved into the kitchen my last year of high school, and I was put onto the grill. Started off on the fries, then got put onto the grill, and then next thing you know, 6 months later, I'm cooking Saturday nights at Sizzler, where you might say, what are you cooking at Sizzler? Well, you're doing 300 steaks a night up there. And so I just got the bug for the adrenaline of cooking in a service. And I just loved it. I just fell in love with it from that day on, from that moment on.
In the early years, were there some people or venues that played a really big role in sort of the path that you took?
I think probably it's not specific people. I think it's all about a time and a place. So during my apprenticeship, the chefs that I worked under, but also the sous chefs who came through, whether they were coming from overseas. One notably was a French chef called John. He was the one who, you know, insisted and then sort of gave me the want to move over to France and to work in France, just sort of learning from him, seeing how he worked. And then, you know, moving into other venues after that, it's you know, sometimes it was the guy who was doing the fish at that time who was, you know, an inspiration to me because they could do it, you know, so good, and I always wanted to do it as good as them, as quick as them, as better than them. And I think until I sort of got overseas, my horizons weren't broadened as much to look at, you the bigger picture and who was an influence and who was, doing great things, and I wanted to emulate.
You mentioned that you headed overseas in your early 20s. Tell us about that period of time. What led to that decision to go overseas, and where did you go?
I think, like a lot of young chefs, but also young Australians who want to go and do their working holiday or their trip overseas and find themselves, I got to a stage where I wanted to go and see the world and use my career to do that. And I think the easy, obvious choice for many at that time was to go to London, to England. They had a longer working rights there at that time for the visa partnership, and I just didn't want to go there. I didn't want to go somewhere and then be surrounded by Australians and feel like I was still back home. So at the time, I'd been working under French chefs, and I just asked them to ask around, and I said, "Oh, look, I'll go to France. Why not?" And so they got me a job in a restaurant called Pneuma, which was in Burgundy, former 3-star, which was 2-star at the time. And that's where I went. And I looked on a map as I was getting on the plane and said, "Where is this bloody place?" Didn't realise it was in the middle of the countryside in a little village with 100 inhabitants. And so when I got to Paris, I jumped on a train and went down. At the train station, there was the voiturier, so the guy who would park all the cars at the night time for the customers, Eric, and he was in this little Fiat 500 yellow, old, smoke blowing out the back of it, and he had all the flowers from the restaurant across the back seat. And he looked at me in my suitcase and he goes, "Oh, is that yours?" I go, "Well, yeah, I'm carrying it." And he goes, "Oh, we'll have to come back and get it." Okay, all right. So we went to the restaurant. It was a 25-minute drive away, just me and my backpack, and wondering where my suitcase was going to end up. And then he dropped me off. He said, "I'll go back and get your suitcase." And then that night I got my suitcase back. And that was my introduction to the countryside of France.
Do you have any stories of what life was like for you in such a tiny town after growing up in Brisbane?
I realised that Brisbane wasn't a country town. It wasn't such a small place after all. No, it was a really, really... It was a breath of fresh air for me, I think, at the time in my life, personally and also professionally. It was the change I needed. It was the breath of fresh air, but also the push to say, this is the opportunities now for your career. This is where it could go. This is life, what life could open up for you. And it was challenging, don't get me wrong. I've spent many, many months. I didn't speak a word of French except for very, very basic kitchen French, which was all insulting and not practical. So many times I was, heading down to the storeroom to get potatoes when they'd ask me to start mopping the floor, or, trying to walk out with plates into the restaurant when they just asked me to clean the edge of the plate, things like that. I was the laughing stock of the restaurant for a good 3 months there.
When did you first find your feet in that kitchen and sort of feel like that you were getting on top of things?
Probably took about 6 months, to be honest with you. Not one of them spoke more than basic English there, but they were very, very welcoming, except for one. There was one sous chef who was frightening at the time when I turned up. My first night there, I was out in the back area of the kitchen cleaning. I think it was about 30 kilos of porcinis had just turned up, and I was just cleaning those away. And I'd start hearing these crashing sounds. I thought someone's dropped a plate in the kitchen, and I peeked through the window, and the sous chef, this little, probably maybe 5'4", Korean background but French sous chef, who's got a stack of plates in front of his post every night, and he just throws them at people. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what you've done really. Depending on his humour, mood, and where he was, he'd just start throwing plates at people. It's like, wow, that's pretty full on. The next morning, I was in the kitchen doing my prep away, and he's chased an intern around the kitchen with a chicken trying to put on his head. I was like, what the hell is going on here? And so he tried to, he had a bit of a go at me at the start in terms of my cooking, how things were being put up on the pass, things like that. And probably about 6 months, that's the point that I say to myself where I'd prove myself to him, which meant that there was a certain acceptance. And up until then, I was really chasing my tail just to, make sure that I was meeting standards, so to speak.
What did you learn in that kitchen and take from your time there?
Wow, I learned first big brigade that I'd worked in. This was a 16-person kitchen with real posts. You got a cold larder, hot larder, you got a meat section, veg section, fish section, pastry. It's a real military style brigade. That was the first time I worked in that, and you really learn what team work is about. You know, when you see the 50 kilos of porcinis turn up, and everyone from the sous chef down to the pastry chef and everyone in between, all there, getting it done together, and you go, wow, that's camaraderie. Most of the times I'd just seen, you'd leave the one person in the corner and the other people just laughing at them. So that's probably the big thing I learnt from there, and then obviously the technicity of French cooking and at that level. I could go on for hours about what I learned there, but yeah, the big thing that stuck with me was that camaraderie.
It's a very interesting introduction to French cookery and being so remote. Where did you go from there?
So I had every intention to stay there after first year, but they didn't put my visa application in time. So I found that out right towards the end. So I was very lucky that the head chef there, his best friend was a man called Serge Villa, who had a two-star Michelin restaurant down in the Orléans region in Cantal. And so he said he was looking for staff. So I trundled down there and showed up the front door and met Serge, and then that was the next 6 years of my life.
Take us into those 6 years. How transformational was it for you as a chef?
I think for me as a chef, for me as an individual, it was probably the most impactful time of my life. So Serge became a very, very close friend. He was like a second father to me, and obviously a lot of respect for him professionally, and we had a very, very strong relationship personally as well. And then Serge passed away last year in June from he got a stomach cancer about a year before that. And someone who'd never smoked in his life, barely drank, somewhat fit, but it's his son, his daughter was the same age as my son, born the same year, and it was sorry, I've jumped forward in the story now, but it was a really tough time to see that all go down last year.
Take us into the kitchen with him. Do you have any stories of what it was like working with him?
He was the most calm, controlled person and kitchen I've ever worked in. No yelling, no screaming, no panic, no stress. It was a revelation. It really was. And it taught me to approach my career, my cooking, the way I mise en place, everything completely different. It just turned my whole perception of cooking around. And it made me, you realise that a lot of times chefs like to get there, the first one there in the morning, we're there earlier and earlier and earlier. And then you look at what they're doing, and they're doing the same amount of work and every day getting there a little bit earlier. And his process and his thought was to turn it the other way around and say, well, why do you need to be here more than you should be here? So today we do this work in 4 hours. Tomorrow we do it in 3 hours 50, 3 hours 45. And by the time halfway through a season, well, we're not coming in at 7:30, we're coming at 8 o'clock. And by the end of the year, we're coming in at 8:30. And you're prioritising. It just changed the way I approached it. Organising the kitchens, everything. It was very transformational.
Tell us about that restaurant, some of the sort of real key produce that sort of opened your eyes a bit that you had access to, and maybe some dishes that spoke of that time.
Yep. So you never believed it. So we used to go to the market. So there was a fresh produce market about an hour drive away in Rodez. We'd go every Saturday. We'd leave the restaurant at about 3:30, 4 in the morning. Hour drive out there, get there before 5. Hours trip at the market, then drive back to the restaurant. So first time I got to go to the market with Serge, I was all excited. And then I got to the market and realised I'm standing next to Michel Brass, 3 stars from Lael, who's at the same market as us, and we're shaking hands and having coffee in the morning. And here's a chef from Australia who's one of his first books he bought was Michelle Brass with the gargouille on the front page, all the vegetables, the 92 vegetables and herbs and everything. And I'm standing at the market picking those for their own restaurant, the exact same things he used in that recipe. And Serge looked at me and go, "Are you okay?" He used to call me Brisbane. He go, "Are you okay, Brisbane? Brisbane, you all right?" Like, "Yeah, chef, just having a moment." He's like, "Oh, okay, no worries. Just tell me when you're out of that." And so, this is the market that Michelle Brass gets his produce from. You can only imagine just how quality it is, how amazing it is. And it's not at all you'd picture it either. It's not all pretty. We're pulling it out the back of the guy's van as he's turning up because everyone wants to get the first access to it. So they're like handing it out. Michelle's put his order in, and he knows what he's getting, and the rest of us are fighting basically for what's left over. And we take into the back of the van with lamps, with the torch on the phone, and everything, and it's pretty, pretty cool. And then so just the produce is where I started. It's second to none, and again, I'll jump ahead in the story that it was one thing that worried me coming back to Australia, especially to Brisbane, and I was really pleasantly surprised just how far we've come in Australia. But that's for further on down the track. So there's all this stuff. We'd roll back into the restaurant with it, and we'd have cases and cases of it, and it'd all get put out on the kitchen bench, and you'd stand around and you look at it and go, "Wow, I'm pretty lucky to be cooking with this. I'm really lucky."
Were there any sort of dishes or techniques that sort of you have fond memories of from your time with Serge?
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily one particular product, but it's his approach to the utilisation of vegetables. Everything gets used. Everything gets used, and it's not just for the sake of using it. Everything is found for a purpose that brings something to a dish. So, whether it's, we always, and the same here at the restaurant, there's always, from one vegetable, there's a puree, there'll be a cooked one, there'll be a raw piece, there'll be a shaved piece, a pickle, a juice, whatever it is. It was minimal waste without barking on about the fact we're cooking minimal waste to the preachers. It's just the way we approach the food. It's just the way we did it, because that's the way you should be respecting a vegetable. So I remember like asparagus season was probably, spring was probably the hardest one. We had asparagus, peas, broad beans. So asparagus, you're getting maybe 1,000 asparagus per week. You got to clean up, go through all that. Peas, you got to pod the peas, blanch the peas, then split the peas. Broad beans, same process. So luckily that's when we had interns on. So the interns would just be, pretty much all day long, splitting all these veg. And then you look at the product, what's presented on the plate, and the asparagus dish. We've done many, many different versions of it, but it was, I've never seen one vegetable utilised to so many different ways as well as that.
You mentioned how those 6 years there changed you, not just as a chef and the skill that you obtained, but you as a person as well. What were you like when you came back to Brisbane compared to the chef that jumped on a plane all those years before?
About 15 kilos heavier. That's probably where I should start first. I think I was, by that stage I had a 2-year-old son. I'd competed in a competition called the Bocuse d'Or, which, because Serge had done it and won it and, wanted me to do it and didn't push me to do it, but suggested I do it and got me to do that. I'd matured as a chef, I think, in a way that I don't know how to say it. It's not. I was ready for the next step, I think. That's probably the way to say it. I was ready for the next step on my own, I suppose.
When you did that, you mentioned it was 2018 with RDA. What was it like? Were you surprised at how different it was opening your own venue compared to working in a kitchen?
Serge always said to me, "Brisbane, I wish I was still just sous chef like you, You've got the good life. You go home, you switch off, so don't have any of the worries in the world." And I always say to him, "No, chef, I can't wait to have my own restaurant, like you, and it's going to be great." And he said, "No, Brisbane, you'll call me. You call me when you open your own restaurant, we'll talk again." And no word of a lie, 6 months after opening, we used to speak more than that, but I called him 6 months to the dot after opening. I said, "Chef, You know what? You were right. I said you were right. And I think that's what excited me the most about opening a restaurant was learning something new, doing something new. I had the benefit of having worked with Serge, who was chef, owner, operator, who everything was in-house. You know, we did everything from fixing door seals, door handles, plumbing, all maintenance at any time of the day, whether it's late at night or 10 minutes before busy Sunday lunch service, because there was no one else around to do it. You're 30 minutes from the closest supermarket, so you can't just get someone to come and do it. So you learn to be able to do all these things. And I think that put me in good stead for opening up here, because it meant I could be careful about, money when we opened up, and not having to rely on other people for too many things.
Take us back to that period of time. You said that you were pleasantly surprised by the produce in Brisbane. Tell us about opening up and getting sort of to know the producers here. What was it like?
It was a long, drawn-out process. People took a long time to come around to us. I worked out very quickly that, whether it was producers, suppliers, general public or media, my background was not as not as popular as someone who'd done the same sort of background in a 2 or 3 hat restaurant here in Australia. There was not maybe an understanding of it, but probably also too many people who, waved the magic wand of having done a stage for 3 months and saying they were Michelin chefs and all this sort of hoo-ha. So that, it just impeded our growth, made our growth probably a little bit more organic. But we've had people come to us, or people who I've seeked out, like Falls Farm. They're about an hour out of Brisbane, Mapleton. They've got produce second to none, and it's my go-to for following a season, because Brisbane has, I think we were saying, 8 micro seasons, which are completely ridiculous, and it's basically summer and a not so hot summer. That's all we have here. As far as produce goes, we had there's always this 2-week period in the middle of June where we'll have tomatoes. Don't know why. No one knows why. It's just the way it is. And so they're a guide for me, and their produce is second to none. But they follow the seasons, and they allow me to understand how the seasons are working here and when the produce should be used, and not going to the Brisbane markets here where you've got asparagus all year round, you've got peaches all year round, and you're not knowing, unless you're really attuned to it, exactly when they should be used at their best.
How much has RDA changed since that sort of first sort of iteration in 2018?
Well, we've gone from having 2 tables a night to having 16. That's probably a good start. It was through a little curveball of COVID in the middle, and no, I think it's the way this restaurant was opened was, I didn't take any loans out, did it off my own back. Mum, Dad chipped in a bit of money, and so when we opened, it resembled nothing of what it was today. But I just wanted to get it open and just start cooking, and then slowly, as we could, started to add a bit on, refurbishments here, grow the wine list, things like that. So we probably took a good 2 years until it was literally the 2 months before COVID happened. We just hit our straps, and so evolution for me is not, we haven't changed the format of the menu, but the restaurant itself has evolved. It's changed. It's become what I imagined at the start, and it's organically made its way there.
You mentioned really early on in this chat about how you never sort of envisaged having more than 1 restaurant, but here you are with 3 now. How did the second restaurant come about, and what was that like then, sort of juggling 2 venues?
Yeah, so Terry Gallacher, a bit of a stalwart up here in Brisbane, at the original Montrachet restaurant. He opened Le Cachevin. Same time I opened RDA. A little funny side story. Restaurant Dan Arnold was never going to be the name of this restaurant. If you look at my registered business name, it's actually Cachet Restaurant Pty Ltd. So I was going to call the restaurant Cachet, which means hidden in French. And about a month before, I read in a magazine or whatever that Thierry Galichet is reopening a restaurant, and it's going to be called Le Cacheva. And I went, shit, I can't open a restaurant basically the same week as TG and expect to, we'll just disappear into no man's land. We'll never be heard of again. I said, shit, we're going to change the name. And so it was a last minute decision. It's something that's very much done over in France, and it's probably too fresh back. It was so fresh from coming back that I just jumped on and did that and ran with that. But so Thierry then came in. We became very close friends. And he always spoke about how Le Cachevin for him was too big. It was bigger than what he wanted to do. He was looking to wind down and reduce the amount of stress he puts on himself. And he also has imported his own wine for his venues for the last, I'd say, 20 years. And he also wanted to hand that legacy, so to speak, over to myself. And at that time, he had a gentleman called Roman come on as his restaurant manager, who a year and a half later decided to want to have his own venue as well. And so Thierry said, look, I want to have this legacy continue, and I think you guys, myself and Roman, would be the perfect people to continue it. So we continued the operation of Le Cachevin, and we've now taken over and continued to do the wine import for ourselves for our own venues.
Pneuma opened about a year ago. What's it been like, sort of off the back of COVID and during this period of time to have a third venue? What's it been like?
Well, Pneuma was a space in the city that's conveniently located between the new casino, Brisbane Live Arena that's coming, stadium, and the Court of Law just around the corner. And it was going to go to market or just disappear into some other sort of operation. And I managed to pick it up, and the rent is ridiculously cheap. So I took a 9-year lease on it, 3 plus 3 plus 3. I said to hell with it because I could almost pay the rent basically from my own back pocket. And I think in the future that space is going to be prime realty. And so that'll happen. And then, I was with one of my best friends and head chef here at RDA, Shane. We were saying, what are we going to do in there? We just open it up and just, get something going or what's going on. And I was then having a beer with Matt Blackwell, and he just finished up at Gamer, and he didn't know what he was going to do. And I said, look, do you want to come and give us a hand just to open this thing up? He goes, yeah, all right. And I took him over there. I said, look, do you want to chip in a bit and come on board and just, over the years, you just take a bit more of it and we'll just finish up 50-50 on there. He goes, yeah, why not? And it basically went from there. We realised one late night that we were both diehard Tool fans and had a lot more in common, both in our cooking careers and our approach to food, but also our personal lives, that it just felt right. And I know it doesn't really, not really a commonplace to have two chefs go into a venture together, but I think that's, when you have people that don't have big egos, it can happen and it can work really well.
It's interesting, the Tool link. They're a very different band to many on the planet. Does that sort of translate through the experience or the food at all?
Yeah, a little bit. I think everyone's jumped on the fact that Pneuma is the name of a Tool song. If you look behind it, it's the meaning of the word is actually it's when one or multiple, creative spirits combine as a collective. So that was the idea of, a little hidden meaning behind the word Pneuma for Matt and I as well. But I think absolutely the venue leads itself towards that. It's almost got a New York loft sort of feel to it, and we've given it a real sort of sexy spruce up, underground, organic sort of feel to it. And I think it does feel different to any other restaurant in Brisbane aesthetically, 100%. And it's not intentional, but I think also in the way that Tool's not intentionally making music to stereotype people or to be different and just making a lot of good music.
You mentioned of the amazing impact that Surge had on you as a young chef and then growing into building your own business. How do you get the best out of your staff? What's your approach with your venues?
Look, I think we're very conscious of the way we run the venues, and there's no bullshit and there's no making people feel good about themselves for the sake of it. But it's an inclusive environment. So everyone is encouraged and is allowed to be involved at any level in any sort of day-to-day operational decision making, because at the end of the day, who says that we know the best way to do it? You know, we're still learning things in kitchen organisation or kitchen ops from the kitchen hand who's from the Philippines, who's never been in a kitchen before. So, you know, I think it's to get the best out of our staff, they've got to see the result. They've got to know what the result is. They've got to know the satisfaction of the guests. They've got to know, and with all the restaurants, particularly RDA, it's an open kitchen. All the guests walk past the kitchen on the way out. And so they see that satisfaction from the guests, and the guests engage with the staff in the kitchen. And I think that, as much as anything nowadays, is a driving force for them.
I think you're an amazing example of that it doesn't matter where you start, you know, considering what you have and what you deliver for Brisbane and, you know, your first steps were at Sizzler. Well, what advice would you have for someone young that's in hospitality and looking to find their way? What's the best sort of path for them?
If I can be completely honest with you, I don't know anymore. I used to think it was pretty straightforward, but I think our industry's got some serious gaps that we need to start addressing. I think that evolution has been too quick for younger generation coming through their studies, coming through restaurants, and with the saturation of restaurants, it means there's positions for young people who are not necessarily ready for it, but there's a need for them, so they are taken for it. And I think until we start to readdress the programs and the way that we bring our young generation through their training and who is actually moulding them for the future, I think we've got a pretty bleak sort of outlook coming.
Does that make it challenging for you, you know, in regards to staffing and training and finding the right staff for your 3 venues?
Yep, I look outside people from the industry now. Yep, I look outside people from the industry for the kitchen. We have more success training, you know, like I mentioned, the Filipino kitchen hand or kitchen hands or people who come into a kitchen who have never done training before, but you can see it, you can feel it in their eyes. You know straight away if they want it. And they're more receptive to what we show them, what we give them. And their loyalty is greater. And that's almost the blueprint for us nowadays if we want to bring young chefs through. Apprentices, we had last apprentice we had here was here for about not even 3 weeks, just got a block of TAFE done, and then I got an email saying they're not coming back. Well, no worries. So, you know what I mean? And then that's the back of house, which, you know, for us is the easy one to fill because, you know, people like myself and Matt, you know, we've got young generation who want to work with us, but front of house, you know, it's another conversation for another day, I think.
What do you think some of the solutions might be for that?
Well, we need to start an education system with a core program for both sides of a restaurant with a layover between the two, meaning that those who go into hospitality school are exposed to both sides, do work placements in both sides, spend a larger majority of their time at school than in workplaces. And yeah, I think that's a great starting point.
You've created 3 amazing venues in Brisbane, and you only set out to create one. But do you have any plans for the next sort of year or 2 now that you have these sort of 3 foundation restaurants?
No, we're really solidifying and just, you know, concentrating on all 3 of those venues at the moment. And with so much happening in Brisbane, you know, whether we're busier and busier or we're looking to, you know, concentrate on our wine import program to make sure that that's, you know, solid moving forward, and we've got the planning and structure in place for that. Because you don't have any terms when you're buying wine from overseas. You're paying everything up front for a container, and you got to make sure you're planned and ready for that. That's probably the focus right now. That's not to say something won't pop up and, I'm spontaneous enough to follow it sometimes, but sometimes you just go with the feeling.
You mentioned once you stepped into a commercial kitchen that you caught the bug, and you've come a long way and created some amazing things since then. What do you love about what you do?
I never feel like I work a day in my life, honest to God. Even doing 90 hours a week for someone else overseas or, just as many for myself here, I just love what I do so much.
Well, I think it shows with what you're creating there. Dan, absolute honour to have you on Deep in the Weeds today to hear just a part of your story. Please keep in touch and we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks, Huck. Really appreciate the chat.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.